I didn't plan the visit. At my age, I arrange everything weeks ahead: doctor's appointments, grocery trips, even my calls to friends. But that morning, something cold and sharp twisted beneath my ribs, the kind of instinct only a mother develops after decades of loving a child who drifts further from her grasp each year. I bought the first ticket I could find and flew across the country without telling a soul. By the time I reached the hospital, my hands were trembling. I asked the nurse for my daughter-in-law, and the way her expression softened told me the truth before her words did. Data was in the ICU, unconscious, dangerously dehydrated, her lungs fighting a losing battle against pneumonia. She looked so small under the tangle of wires and machines, a young woman who had never done anything but show kindness to a world that often gave her none in return. Hello, beautiful souls. Before I open up about this tough part of my journey, I kindly ask you to subscribe and press the like button. By doing so, you help carry these stories to others who may be searching for light, proof that even through struggle, we can rise. I asked where my son was. The nurse shrugged. We haven't seen him in days. My heart dropped, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when I stepped outside to steady my breathing. His car. The one I bought him for safety, for family, for his future children. It screeched around the corner, bass shaking the hospital windows. And there he was, my son, laughing with his head thrown back, two young women hanging out of the windows like they were on a joyride through paradise instead of passing the building where his wife lay dying alone. That was the moment something inside me fractured. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the truth settling over me like winter frost. Whatever came next would change our family forever, and I was no longer afraid of the confrontation that was coming. I have lived long enough to know that life rarely shouts its warnings, it whispers them. And for 3 days straight, that whisper had turned into a steady ache beneath my breastbone. Neither my son nor my daughter-in-law answered their phones. Their silence lingered like an omen, the kind that kept me awake at night staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock count down the seconds. By the third morning, I couldn't bear it. I packed a small bag, slipped a few jars of my homemade preserves inside, Sterling always loved them as a boy, and caught the earliest flight out. I told no one. Not because I wanted to surprise them, but because I feared what I'd find. Airports used to thrill me, but that day the noise, the smell of burnt coffee, the endless shuffle of feet, all of it blurred into a haze of dread. I held my tote bag tight against my chest, whispering small prayers as though I could warm the cold knot of worry lodged inside me. When my Uber pulled up to their building, I felt the first real wave of fear. The condo I had purchased for them, warm brick facade, wide windows, a place I imagined would cradle the beginning of their marriage, looked unchanged from the outside. But the moment I stepped off the elevator and saw their door sitting slightly ajar, like someone had rushed out without thinking, my breath caught. Inside, the home I had given them with so much hope felt abandoned. The air was stale, thick with the smell of neglect. A tower of unwashed dishes slumped in the sink. Empty bottles lined the counter. Bills I had never seen, pink, urgent notices, lay unopened on the kitchen table. But what chilled me most was the small box of medication sitting untouched, covered in a thin layer of dust. The pills Veda needed. The ones she clearly hadn't taken. My heart cracked then, not from anger, but from the sudden realization that she had been sick long before anyone stepped in to help her. I whispered her name into the silence, half expecting her to appear from another room. Instead, it was a neighbor, an elderly woman in a faded robe, who stepped into the doorway. Her weary eyes told me everything before she spoke. "Honey, the ambulance took her 2, maybe 3 days ago." "And my son?" I asked, though I already feared the answer. She sighed. "Haven't seen him. There was loud music here, but he hasn't been home." My legs felt hollow, but somehow I made it to the hospital. The drive blurred into a single, dreadful heartbeat. When the receptionist finally found Veda's name in the ICU log, I felt the world tilt. Pneumonia. Severe. Malnutrition. Dehydration. 5 days with a high fever and no help. I stood beside her bed, gripping the metal rail to keep from falling. Her face was so pale, her body so still, she looked like she was vanishing. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, whispering, "You're not alone anymore, sweetheart. I'm here now." But as I looked at her fragile form, a second, sharper truth surged through me, one I had been avoiding for years. My son had failed her. And perhaps, he had failed me long before that. I didn't know then just how deep his failures ran, how many lines he had crossed. But standing beside that hospital bed, the first seed of resolve took root. Something was terribly, unforgivably wrong. And I would uncover every piece of it. The ICU waiting room smelled of antiseptic and sorrow, the kind of air that clings to your clothes and follows you long after you've left. I approached the desk, my voice steadier than my heartbeat as I asked for information on my daughter-in-law. The nurse scrolled through her computer, and when she finally found the name, her expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to make my stomach drop. "She's in critical condition," she said softly. "The doctor will explain." Critical. The word echoed like a bell tolling at a funeral. When the doctor arrived, he introduced himself with the tired eyes of a man who had delivered too many grim updates. He gestured for me to step aside into the hallway, lowering his voice. "Your daughter-in-law was brought in with advanced pneumonia. Severe dehydration. Acute malnutrition. She's extremely weak. Based on her condition, she's been sick for days, possibly over a week, without help." Without help. Those 2 words pierced through me. I asked him to repeat it, hoping I had misheard, but he only nodded with quiet, professional sympathy. "She arrived unresponsive. Her fever had been dangerously high for too long. We have her on a ventilator and 4 fluids. We're doing everything we can." My breath came out uneven. I wasn't just hearing a medical update, I was hearing a timeline of neglect. "Has her husband been here?" I forced out. The doctor hesitated. "No. We haven't had any family here since she arrived." "None?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "No, ma'am. You're the first." The first. Her own husband hadn't walked through these doors. Hadn't asked a single question. Hadn't even pretended to care. When the doctor finally allowed me into her room, I felt my heart fold in on itself. The sight of Veda stole the breath from my chest. Her tiny frame barely lifted the blankets. Her lips were pale, her cheeks hollow, her skin almost translucent. The mechanical rhythm of the ventilator filled the room, an eerie stand-in for her own strength. This girl, this gentle, thoughtful girl, had always treated me with more respect than my own son had in years. And here she was, fighting to stay alive, alone. I stepped closer, gripping the rail at the side of her bed. Her hand lay limp, so small and fragile that I hesitated before touching it. When I did, her skin was warm, feverish, but unresponsive. I whispered her name, though I knew she couldn't hear me. "I'm here now, sweetheart," I murmured. "I'm so sorry. I should have come sooner." Regret washed over me in waves. Had I ignored signs? Had she tried to tell me something once, quietly, the way polite people try not to burden others? Had I chosen not to see the truth about my son because I didn't want to admit what he'd become? I stayed at her bedside for what felt like hours, watching the monitors rise and fall with a rhythm too delicate for comfort. Nurses came and went, adjusting tubes, checking vitals, whispering updates I barely registered. Eventually, I stepped into the hallway to gather myself. I needed air before I broke completely. My hands shook as I pressed them against the cool metal railing outside the ICU doors. That was when another thought hit me, sharp, sudden, undeniable. If Veda had been lying here for days, and my son hadn't visited once, where was he? What was he doing while his wife was slipping away? I didn't know the answer yet. But I would soon. And when I found him, nothing in this world would be able to shield him from the truth he had forced me to see. I stepped outside the ICU doors, needing a moment to steady myself before I shattered. The hospital's evening air was cool, almost sharp, and for a brief second, I let it fill my lungs, trying to calm the storm inside me. My thoughts circled endlessly, Veda alone, suffering for days, slipping toward death while the world moved on without noticing. But where was my son? Why hadn't he been here? I leaned against the railing, listening to the distant hum of traffic, when suddenly the sound changed, louder, harsher. A deep, thudding bass rolled down the street, rattling the windows beside me. I turned instinctively. A midnight blue SUV swung around the corner, tires screeching as music blasted from its open windows. Even before I saw the license plate, I recognized the car. I had chosen it for him myself, safe, reliable, a gift meant to support a growing young family. But what spilled out of those open windows was not the life I had imagined. Two young women leaned out laughing, their hair whipping in the wind. In the driver's seat, my son, my grown son, threw his head back, shouting something I couldn't hear over the pounding beat. His face glowed with amusement, with freedom, with a kind of careless joy I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. He didn't glance toward the hospital. Didn't slow down. Didn't even look in the direction of the windows behind which his wife lay dying. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the railing so tightly my fingers ached. I watched him disappear down the boulevard toward the glittering lights of downtown, toward laughter and nightlife and anything but responsibility. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was so deep, so sudden, it felt physical, like something had cracked inside me. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Sterling lit up the screen. "Hey, Ma. I'm at the hospital with Veda right now. Haven't left her side. It's really serious. Pray for us. I stared at the glowing words, each one a lie brazen enough to scorch the air around me. At that moment, clarity didn't come as rage. It came as stillness. He wasn't just absent, he was deceitful. He wasn't confused, he was choosing this. He wasn't lost, he was lying with purpose. And in that chilling quiet, I understood. The confrontation I had once feared was no longer optional. It was inevitable. And it would change everything. For several minutes after reading my son's message, I remained utterly still. Not because I was calm, no, calm was a luxury I had long since lost, but because my body could not decide whether to collapse or erupt. The truth pressed against me from all sides, his smile in that car, the girl's laughter, the music shaking the street, and then the audacity of his lie glowing on my screen. A younger version of me might have cried. A softer version of me might have begged him to explain. But the woman standing outside the ICU that evening was not young, nor soft, nor willing to be deceived again. Something deep inside me, something maternal and ancient, shifted. I have lived through enough storms to know when a turning point arrives. And this one didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with quiet. A cold, focused quiet that crystallized my thoughts into something sharper than anger. For years, I had excused Sterling's behavior. I had called him misunderstood, overwhelmed, stressed, trying his best. I had blamed his father's absence, the world's harshness, the weight of adulthood. I had carried his burdens as if motherhood required me to swallow my own truth just to preserve his illusion of potential. But as I stood outside that hospital, watching the taillights of the SUV fade into the neon glow, I realized I had crafted a dangerous lie, not for him, but for myself. My son wasn't lost. He was willfully cruel. That realization settled over me like frost on a windowpane, silent, icy, unmistakable. I wasn't looking at a confused young man struggling to find his way. I was looking at a man who had abandoned his vows, his wife, and even the most basic human decency. And I had enabled him. God forgive me, I had enabled him. The weight of that guilt didn't crush me, it galvanized me. If I once believed a mother's role was to protect her child from pain, I now understood something far truer. Sometimes a mother must protect the world from the child she raised. The softness in me, the part that always reached for excuses, finally broke. In its place rose a clarity so intense it felt like stepping out of a long, suffocating fog. I straightened my spine. Wiped my face. Slipped my phone into my purse. No more hoping he would change. No more shielding him from consequences. No more bending to his lies. For the first time in my life, I felt the power of choosing truth over blood. I looked back toward Veda's room, at the cold blue glow of the machines keeping her alive. She had no mother of her own nearby. No safety net. No protector. So I made a decision, quiet, firm, final. If my son had abandoned his responsibilities, I would claim mine. Not for him, but for the young woman he had left to die. And as that decision settled into my bones, I felt something surprising. Strength. A strength I hadn't known in years. A strength I was going to need for what came next. Because this was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a reckoning. I didn't go far from the ICU. I simply walked to a quiet corner near the vending machines, where the humming fluorescent lights cast long, sterile shadows across the floor. My heart was steady now, too steady. It felt unnatural, like the calm before a controlled burn. But clarity has its own temperature, and mine had cooled into something unbreakable. I took out my phone. Not to call my son, those days were over. I opened the contact list and scrolled to a different number entirely, 911. For 35 years, I had been the one to rescue Sterling. Every scraped knee, every broken rule, every bad decision, I was always the buffer between him and the consequences he earned. I told myself that was love. But watching him party while his wife fought for life had snapped the last thread holding that illusion together. When the dispatcher answered, her voice sounded distant, almost gentle. 911, what's your emergency? My vehicle has been stolen, I said, my tone level, almost unnervingly calm. A midnight blue SUV. License plate, I recited it from memory, the numbers rolling off my tongue like I had rehearsed them. It wasn't lost on me that the vehicle wasn't truly stolen. But legally? The car was registered in my name. I had bought it. I had insured it. And the moment I witnessed him abusing that gift, and the life of the woman he vowed to care for, it ceased to be his privilege to use it. Do you know the individual driving the vehicle? The dispatcher asked. I hesitated, just long enough to let the truth settle in my bones. No, I answered. Not anymore. The words tasted sharp but honest. Maybe for the first time in years. She asked a few more questions. Location, direction of travel, whether he appeared intoxicated. I answered each one with clarity, describing the loud music, the reckless speed, the young women hanging from the windows. When I hung up, my hand did not shake. There was no rush of guilt, no pang of doubt. Only relief. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about anger. This was the first step in drawing a hard, final line, a line I should have drawn long ago. I slipped my phone back into my purse and turned toward the ICU, toward the unconscious girl who had been abandoned by the one person who owed her love and protection. If Sterling refused to be her guardian, then I would become the force that ensured justice reached him instead. The reckoning had begun. The hours that followed passed in a blur of hospital updates, whispered prayers, and the relentless beeping of machines I wished I could silence with a simple touch. But no matter how long I sat beside Veda, holding her warm but motionless hand, one question gnawed at me: how long had she been suffering like this? I didn't want to step away from her bedside, but I needed answers. Real answers, not the lies my son had fed me for years. So when the nurse assured me she would keep a close eye on Veda, I forced myself to return to the condo, hoping I might find something, anything. That explained how her life had unraveled so completely while mine remained blissfully unaware. The moment I opened the door, the stale air wrapped around me again. It felt heavier this time, dense with neglect and something darker, something hidden. I turned on the living room lights, praying the brightness would bring clarity. Instead, it brought truth. I moved methodically, touching surfaces, opening cabinets, searching through drawers, not to invade her privacy, but to understand the life she had been living behind closed doors. In the bedroom, I found a heap of laundry that looked untouched for weeks, and on the nightstand, a half-empty bottle of water, the plastic warped with age. On Sterling's side of the bed, empty snack wrappers and receipts told a different story: late-night takeout, expensive bars, designer stores. Not a single sign of a man caring for a sick wife. I opened the closet. His clothes hung neatly, carefully arranged by color, just as he always liked them. Hers were pushed to one side, wrinkled, some still damp from being washed and never dried. The imbalance felt symbolic, a visual echo of their marriage. I was about to close the closet when something caught my eye, a small journal tucked beneath a stack of towels, as if hidden intentionally. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The cover was soft and worn, the edges frayed. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The first entry I read was short, shaky. March 12th, Sterling asked for money again. He said he needed it for a business opportunity. I gave him the last $400 I saved for the dentist. My tooth hurts. He said I should be grateful he's trying to build a future for us. I felt my chest tighten. I turned the page. April 20th, he yelled at me today. Said the apartment is his mother's gift to him and I shouldn't forget I'm a guest here. I didn't argue. I don't want to be homeless. He promised me he'll change. I believed him, again. My throat burned. Another page. May 5th, I found the receipt from the pawn shop. He sold Grandma's ring. The one she left me. He said he lost it, but I know the truth. He bought himself a new watch with the money. I closed the journal for a moment, pressing it against my lap as if that could stop the flood of rage rising inside me. This wasn't a marriage. This was domination disguised as love. And my son, had orchestrated every part of it. I opened the journal again, unable to stop. June 2nd, I've been coughing for days. He says I'm overreacting. The heat is expensive. He turned it off because I don't contribute enough. I try not to complain. I don't want to be a burden. But I'm so cold. That was the sentence that broke me. The idea of her lying in this apartment, shivering, weak, desperate for warmth, while he gallivanted around the city playing the role of a carefree bachelor, it lit a fury in me so fierce I had to put the journal down before my hands tore the pages. I stood up, pacing the room, feeling my age and shedding it all at once. This was no longer about a careless mistake. This was cruelty. Systematic, deliberate cruelty. And I couldn't pretend anymore that I hadn't seen the signs. I had told myself Sterling was overwhelmed. Stressed. Immature. But immaturity doesn't extinguish the heat in winter or siphon a woman's savings or leave her to die alone. No. This was intentional. I gathered the journal, tucked it gently into my purse, and looked around the apartment one last time. The home I had given them, hoping it would be the foundation for a good life, had become a silent witness to his devastation of hers. As I locked the door behind me, the weight of my new purpose settled into place. I wasn't just confronting a failing son. I was facing a man who had chosen harm at every turn. And I would make sure he never harmed her again. By the time I arrived at my attorney's office the next morning, the weight of the journal in my purse felt heavier than stone. Every word Veda had written echoed through me, a quiet testimony of fear and endurance. It was all the confirmation I needed, if she survived. And God, I wanted her to survive. She needed protection, not promises. Safety, not hope. A home that couldn't be stripped from her with a tantrum or a forged signature. My attorney, an old friend named Margaret, took one look at my face and didn't bother with small talk. "What happened?" she asked, already ushering me into her office. I sat down, smoothing my coat across my lap. "I need to transfer the condo," I said. "Immediately." She blinked. "To Sterling?" "To Veda." A long, loaded silence filled the room as she studied me, her eyes narrowing with the kind of intuition that only comes from decades of knowing someone's deepest wounds and fiercest loyalties. "This is a serious step," she warned gently. "Once the deed is signed, there's no reversing it without her consent." "I understand." My voice didn't waver. "And that's the point." She nodded, sliding a folder toward herself, fingers already dancing over her keyboard. "Tell me exactly what you want." I took a deep breath. "I want Veda to have that home outright. I want Sterling legally removed from any claim to it. And I want full power of attorney to handle any necessary financial transitions on her behalf until she regains her strength." Margaret paused. "Does he know you're doing this?" "No," I said. "And he won't, not until it's done." As she prepared the documents, I thought about the young woman lying in that hospital bed, unaware of the storm her husband had unleashed. I thought about her shaking handwriting, her fear of being kicked out, her desperation to keep what little stability she had. And then I thought about Sterling, the boy I raised, the man he had chosen to become, the cruelty he wielded so casually. Every excuse I had ever made for him crumbled like brittle paper. When Margaret placed the deed in front of me, the lines crisp and final, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen and signed my name with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. "There," I whispered, setting the pen down. "It's hers." Margaret stamped the documents, her expression softening. "It will be registered within the hour." I exhaled, a long breath that felt like it had been held for half a lifetime. But the work wasn't finished. Next, we drafted a general power of attorney that would allow me to manage repairs, utilities, and security upgrades for the condo, anything necessary to make sure Sterling could never use it as leverage again. As I left her office, the morning light felt sharper, almost cleansing. I pulled my coat tighter around me and headed back to the hospital, where Veda's fight continued behind glass and wires. For the first time since I arrived in that city, I felt like the scales were shifting, slowly, decisively. I couldn't undo the pain my son had caused. But I could build a wall strong enough to keep him from causing more. And this, transferring the home he had weaponized, was the first brick. I had barely returned to the hospital when my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. For a fleeting second, I wondered if it was a doctor with news about Veda. Instead, a stern voice greeted me. "Ma'am, this is Officer Klein. We've detained a vehicle registered in your name." My heart didn't even speed up. "The midnight blue SUV?" "Yes, ma'am." "The driver, Sterling Vance, is currently in custody for reckless driving and suspected DUI. He resisted arrest." Of course he resisted. Of course he believed no rule applied to him. "Thank you, officer," I said. "Please proceed as required." I ended the call before he could say more. 2 hours later, while I sat beside Veda's bed, a notification chimed on my phone. It was a social media screenshot sent by my attorney, apparently forwarded to her by someone who followed my son online. A young woman, one of the girls from the car, had posted a story for all the world to see. "Ladies, beware. Sterling V ain't rich. His MOM owns the car. He got arrested. Total loser energy." Underneath, dozens of laughing emojis, comments calling him pathetic, people tagging their friends to share the humiliation. My son had always built his life on the illusion of status, on borrowed money and borrowed pride. And now the world was seeing him stripped of both. I should have felt heartbreak. I should have felt shame. But instead, I felt something startlingly simple, the truth settling into place. This public unraveling wasn't caused by me. It wasn't caused by Veda. It wasn't caused by bad luck. It was caused by him, by every selfish decision he had made with full awareness. For the first time, his facade had cracked in full view of others. And though I didn't rejoice in it, I didn't grieve either. His downfall had finally begun. By late afternoon the next day, the air in the hospital felt different, tense, expectant, as if the building itself sensed a storm approaching. I sat in the lobby with a book open in my lap, though I couldn't absorb a single word. I was waiting. Not out of hope, but out of certainty. Sterling would come. And I would be ready. The elevator dinged. He stumbled out. Even from a distance, I could see the consequences of the last 48 hours carved into him: wrinkled shirt, bruised cheek, the angry stiffness of someone who had spent time in a holding cell and believed he was too important for such treatment. But despite all that, his expression carried the same entitlement he'd always worn, like the world owed him an apology for not bending in his favor. He spotted me immediately and stormed across the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from nurses and visitors. "There you are," he snapped, voice echoing louder than it should. "Are you out of your mind?" His anger washed over me like a cold breeze. It didn't touch me anymore. He planted himself in front of my chair, arms flailing in outrage. "You called the cops on me. You told them I stole my own car." I closed the book gently and lifted my eyes to his. "It isn't your car." His jaw clenched. "Mom, stop. Just stop. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you know what those officers said to me? Do you know what my friends are posting? I can't go anywhere without someone laughing." I interjected softly, "Your wife is in the ICU." He froze for a split second, just long enough for me to see the flicker of guilt. But instead of remorse, he chose indignation. "I was with friends. I needed a break," he barked. "And you had no right to do any of this." "I had every right," I said, my voice level. "And now you're here, yelling about embarrassment while your wife fights for her life 2 floors above us." "She's fine," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She always exaggerates. And you're always on her side." I stared at him, stunned not by the lie, but by how quickly it came. Sterling, I said quietly, you haven't visited her once in days. He scoffed, but his eyes darted away. I was going to today. Were you? I asked. Before or after you went club hopping with those girls? His face reddened. You don't know anything about my life. I know what I saw. He took a step back, ran his hands through his hair, and then lunged forward again, planting his palms on the arms of my chair. Where are the keys? He demanded. Just give me the damn keys, Mom. I need to go. I have people waiting for me. And I need the car back now. I blinked slowly. There is no car. He laughed, short, sharp, and disbelieving. What do you mean, no car? Did you have it towed? Are you trying to teach me some twisted lesson? It's sold, I said calmly. The dealership picked it up this morning. The money has already been transferred. His face went white. You sold my car? That vehicle was mine, I corrected. Bought with my money, registered in my name. And the funds now belong to the hospital, specifically, to Veda's treatment. His body swayed as if the ground had shifted beneath him. You can't do that, he whispered. It was my life. How could you? I met his panicked gaze with unwavering resolve. Your wife nearly died alone while you played the role of a bachelor. That car enabled you to abandon every responsibility you swore to uphold. And now it will save the life you tried to destroy. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked small, truly small, for the first time since he was a boy. I straightened my spine. There is more you need to know. He braced himself, though weakly. What now? The condo, I said. It's no longer yours. I signed the deed over this morning. A strangled sound escaped him. You didn't. You're lying. You know I don't lie. His knee seemed to buckle, and he grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady himself. All of this, he whispered, for her? For the woman you abandoned, I said softly. And for the mother who finally understands who you've chosen to become. Silence settled between us, heavy and immovable. He stared at me with disbelief turning into something darker, resentment, desperation, panic. But beneath it all was the unmistakable understanding that his world was collapsing. And this time I would not rescue him. Not from the truth. Not from consequences. Not from himself. The confrontation he feared, and I had long avoided, had finally arrived. And neither of us would leave it unchanged. Sterling's face twisted from panic to rage in a heartbeat. Before I could say another word, he spun toward the elevators. I'm going to see my wife, he snapped. She'll tell you the truth. She'll clear this whole mess up. He stormed down the hallway, ignoring the startled glances from nurses. I followed at a distance, not out of fear, but because I knew exactly what he intended. He thought Veda, frail, terrified, barely out of danger, would rise up and defend him the way she always had. He was counting on her silence, her loyalty, her fear. He reached the ICU doors, shoved them open, and took 2 steps inside before a large figure moved into view. A private security guard, broad-shouldered, stone-faced, hired just hours earlier, stepped directly into his path and placed a firm hand against Sterling's chest. "Authorized personnel only," the guard said calmly. "No visitors without clearance." Sterling recoiled as if struck. "Are you kidding me? I'm her husband. Move." Behind the glass partition, the machines monitoring Veda's fragile body began to spike. At the sound of his voice, her pulse surged upward in a frantic rhythm. Her fingers twitched. Her breathing hitched beneath the ventilator. Even unconscious, she recognized the threat. "You're upsetting the patient," the guard warned, his voice dropping into something firmer. "Step back." Sterling shoved against him. "She wants to see me. She needs me." "No," I said quietly from behind him. He turned, wild-eyed and furious. "She's terrified of you," I continued. "Even in her sleep, she feels your presence like a wound reopening." The guard began ushering him toward the hall, his movements controlled but unmistakably firm. "You can't do this," Sterling shrieked. "I have a right." "You had a right," I corrected. "You surrendered at the moment you abandoned her." The ICU door swung shut behind him with a decisive click. For the first time, he realized he had lost access not just to things, but to the person he once controlled. And the look on his face told me he felt that loss more sharply than anything yet. The moment the ICU doors slammed shut, something inside Sterling seemed to unravel. He stared at the closed entrance as if willing it to reopen, as if sheer force of entitlement could make the world bend for him again. When it didn't, he staggered backward, his chest heaving, eyes darting wildly between the guard, the hallway, and me. "You can't do this," he whispered, not in anger now, but in disbelief. "You can't just take everything." I didn't answer. "Not yet." He approached me slowly, his bravado dissolving with each step. When he finally reached me, his legs buckled, and he sank to his knees on the hospital floor. His hands clutched at the hem of my coat the way a drowning man clings to a floating piece of debris. "Mama, please." His voice cracked in a way that once would have pierced my heart. "I messed up. I know. But I can fix it. Just give me a chance. One more chance." His tears fell freely, dripping onto the tile. A performance he had perfected over decades, remorse that bloomed only when consequences cornered him. "I'll get a job," he insisted. "I'll take care of Veda. I'll go to every appointment, every treatment. I'll carry her if I have to. Just, don't do this to me. Don't walk away from me." I looked down at him. At the man my son had become. At the boy I had once believed I could save. "Stand up," I said softly. He shook his head, sobbing harder. "Not until you forgive me." "Stand," I repeated, sharper this time. He flinched and rose shakily to his feet, wiping his face with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. "You want the truth?" I asked, meeting his red, swollen eyes. He nodded, desperate. "The truth," I said, "is that you are not suffering because of me. You are suffering because of the choices you made when no one was watching." He blinked, stunned. "You lied. You abandoned. You took. You hurt." And when everything collapsed, you expected me to clean it up, for the 100th time. His lips parted, but no words came. This isn't punishment, I continued, my voice low and steady. This is reality catching up to you. He trembled, chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. And Sterling, I said gently, I won't stand between you and the truth anymore. His face crumpled. Not with anger this time, but with the hollow terror of a man who finally sees the life he built turning to dust beneath him. And for the first time, he understood. I was no longer his shield. I was the mirror he could no longer escape. Sterling didn't leave the hospital quietly. He staggered toward the exit, muttering threats and promises in the same breath, as if he couldn't decide whether to beg for my help or curse my name. But once the sliding doors closed behind him, the hallway finally exhaled. The nurses went back to their rounds. The guard returned to his post. And I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had just happened settle into my bones. Then my phone rang. It was Margaret, my attorney. He's on his way, she said without preamble. Your son. The officers and locksmiths are already here at the condo. I didn't have to ask what he was coming for. Even stripped of the car and publicly humiliated, Sterling still believed he could reclaim the one thing he had always treated like his birthright, the home I had given him. Are the documents ready? I asked. All filed and official, she replied. The property belongs to Veda alone. He has no legal standing. A strange sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in years, the law was not a threat, it was protection. As Margaret spoke, I pictured the scene she was witnessing. Sterling charging into the building, breathless and furious, only to freeze at the sight of two officers supervising locksmiths drilling through the old lock. His outraged shouts. His insistence that he lived there. His disbelief when presented with the freshly stamped deed proving he did not. I imagined the moment they handed him 2 trash bags containing the few belongings he legally owned. No car. No home. No wife to control. No mother to rescue him. Only consequences. Real, unmovable consequences. He's been removed from the premises, Margaret said finally, her voice firm but gentle. It's done. I closed my eyes. Not in sorrow. In release. The door to his old life had been locked, literally and figuratively. And this time I held the only key. 6 months passed like a slow turn of the seasons, each day carrying Veda a little further away from the shadow of her illness and the man who nearly destroyed her. Autumn settled over the city, painting the streets in gold and rust, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the air lighten around us. The apartment, the one that once smelled of neglect and fear, had transformed. Fresh paint warmed the walls, soft peach replacing the dull, lifeless gray Sterling preferred. Sunlight streamed freely now that we'd cleared the clutter he hoarded. Where emptiness once lingered, quiet comfort took root. It wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary. And Veda? She blossomed in ways that brought tears to my eyes. When she first woke in the hospital, she was fragile, frightened, unsure of her footing in a world that had failed her. But with each passing week, her strength returned, slowly at first, then all at once, like a dawn breaking after a long night. She started painting again, small watercolor landscapes that she set by the window to dry. Sometimes, I'd find her standing there, brush in hand, studying the horizon with a soft smile. As though relearning the shape of her own hope. One afternoon, wrapped in a cream-colored blanket, she sat beside me on the balcony and said, "Mom, I applied for a position at the city library." The word mom struck me the way sunlight warms chilled skin, gentle, unexpected, deeply felt. "They're opening a rare books department," she continued. "They need someone trained in restoration. It's not full-time, but I think I'm ready." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to rush. You've been through more than most people endure in a lifetime." "I know," she said softly. "But I want to choose my life now. Not survive it." Her eyes held a steadiness I hadn't seen before, a quiet courage that made me immeasurably proud. We spent our evenings cooking simple meals, talking about little things, the weather, books, the stray cat that visited our balcony. There was no trace of Sterling in our conversations. His name had evaporated from the walls along with the smell of stale smoke. What remained was healing. What remained was peace. What remained was family, born not of blood, but of survival and love. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe freely. We were safe. We were rebuilding. We were whole. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I saw him again. I had stepped out to buy Veda her favorite cinnamon rolls, enjoying the quiet hum of the neighborhood. The kind of peace that feels earned, not given. As I walked past the car wash on the corner, a familiar silhouette caught my eye. At first, I wasn't sure. The man hunched over a soapy Jeep looked thinner, shoulders slumped, movements mechanical. His hair was unkempt, face gaunt, hands red from cold water and harsh chemicals. He scrubbed the fender with frantic precision, the way people work when they know a mistake means losing the only thing they have left. But when he straightened and glanced up, our eyes met. Sterling. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time felt suspended between the person he once pretended to be and the man standing before me now, broken, exhausted, stripped of every illusion. There was no anger in his eyes this time. No arrogance. Not even accusation. Just fatigue. Deep, bone-level fatigue. He took a half step forward, lips trembling as though he wanted to speak. Maybe to beg, maybe to apologize, maybe just to hear someone say his name with familiarity again. But I didn't give him the chance. I didn't turn away quickly or pretend I hadn't seen him. I simply let my gaze slide over him, calm and steady, the same way one looks past a lamppost or a stranger on a busy street. Not cruel. Not triumphant. Just finished. And then I walked on. No rush. No hesitation. Just acceptance. Behind me, I felt his stare lingering, desperate, pleading, hollow. But he didn't call out. Perhaps life had finally taught him the boundaries I couldn't impose when he was younger. Sterling had chosen his path. And now he was living in the world he built with his own hands. For the first time, I felt no guilt for letting him face it alone. That evening, as I returned home with a warm paper bag in hand, the sky above the city glowed pink with the setting sun. The world felt quiet in a way it hadn't in a long time. Not the silence of dread or waiting, but the kind that comes after a storm finally exhausts itself. Veda greeted me at the door, wrapped in her soft blanket, her smile gentle and steady. We ate cinnamon rolls at the kitchen table, the air sweet with cinnamon and new beginnings. She didn't ask about my walk, and I didn't mention who I had seen. Some things, I've learned, are better left in the past where they can no longer claw at the present. Later, as she painted on the balcony and I sipped my tea, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, the choices made, the pain endured, the hard truths finally faced. People often say a mother's love forgives everything. But I've lived long enough to know that forgiveness without accountability is not love at all, it is surrender. And I had surrendered for far too many years. Could I have saved Sterling sooner? Maybe. Could I have taught him differently? Perhaps. But there is a line each person must eventually draw for themselves, and he crossed his so many times that the ground beneath him finally gave way. I did not push him into the life he lives now. He walked into it willingly. And I chose, for the first time, to stop following him. If you've stayed with me through this story, my dear friends, thank you. These tales from my life are not always easy to tell, but they are truthful, and truth, I believe, deserves a voice. If stories like this resonate with you, please subscribe to the channel so I can continue sharing more pieces of my heart, my life, and the lessons I've learned along the way. With love, and with peace at last. Thank you for listening.